I am Nahid Kabbani, and this is the Lighthouse for today's viewers. Welcome to our show. Today, actually, we like to shed some light about the hottest topic in the election, maybe, and around us, maybe because it's really unknown enough for you, my viewers. It is the relationship between us, America, and Israel. What is in it for us, how we can understand it, what we have to do for better tomorrow, for peace, for us, for all of us. For this matter, the best person who can talk about this subject, Miss Alison Weir, we have her for you, and let's welcome her in our show. Welcome to our show, Miss Alison.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. I believe our viewers get to know you, but a little bit introduction will help them to remember.
Sure. I'm a former journalist. I'm the executive director of an organization called If Americans Knew. Our mission is to give Americans the full information on topics of importance that are misreported or underreported in the American media. And our primary focus is on Israel-Palestine because that's so consistently misreported and underreported by the U.S. media. And I'm also, for the past almost 2 years, I guess it is, I'm the president of the Council for the National Interest, which is an organization that's been around for about 20 years. It was founded by former American congressmen and ambassadors. The goal specifically was to counter the Israel lobby, which the founders felt, and we still feel, is such a powerful special interest that it is disastrously distorting American policies. So the idea of our organization is to work toward policies that are in the best interests of all Americans, that are in the best interests of world peace, because that benefits everybody, and that represent what I feel are American values of justice and fairness. So I'm sort of representing both of those organizations.
Wonderful. I may add, we are the best callers for human rights.
Pardon? The best?
America?
Well, I think that Americans in general, I think, the American citizens, like citizens all over the world, want justice and peace and fairness.
Yes, and we find, we try to find human rights for everybody or every group. They
That's
are
right.
under that level of human rights. We try to fight for them and give them their rights. So I guess this package of story, full of things, interest our viewers, interest American people in general, and they should know about it.
Well, I think the topic today, I guess, is specifically about the American. Usually people talk about Israel-Palestine as this distant and confusing region, because that's what it is.
Yes.
It's very far away, it's on the other side of the world, and for most Americans it's very confusing.
Yes.
Most of us are not Jewish and are not Arab or Muslim, have never focused on Israel-Palestine, and don't really understand what it's all about. And it's not because Americans are stupid. It's because it is so poorly covered in the American media. So it's sort of like if I were trying to watch a cricket game, I have no idea what the rules of cricket are. If I came into the middle of a cricket game, I wouldn't know what it was about, who was winning, who was losing, what any of it meant. And in this case, this is a very serious, it's not a game, it's a life and death issue, Israel-Palestine, but most of us don't know the rules, don't know where it came from, don't know the American connection. And it's so confusing, we think, oh well, I'll go on to other subjects that are very important and more understandable, and I'll just leave Israel-Palestine to the, quote, Jews and Arabs and Muslims, and just leave it to them, and I'll stay out of it. The trouble with that is that we are not out of it. As Americans, we are very involved in it. We just don't know that. And that's why it's so important for Americans to focus on this issue, because we are very involved in it. We are having a huge impact on the region, and it is having a huge, very disastrous impact on us. And for those reasons, it's important to know, to understand the history that's not confusing, and the present day also that's not confusing. And I'm happy you're dedicating a show to this.
I thank you for coming, actually. Also, especially, we struggle financially here, and we are involved heavily.
That's right.
Financially in this story also.
That's right. I guess to, sort of think about what is, I'm sure some people are wondering, well, what do you mean we're involved? I mean, I'm sure some viewers that think, what do you mean? I know what's going on. I read the New York Times every day. I listen to NPR. Maybe I watch Fox News. I don't know how many people of your viewers do, but I'm probably some. And are doing what they feel is a good job of trying to follow the news and think that they do know what's going on. Maybe a few have even read 1 or 2 books on this topic. Most haven't, because there are lots of topics. Even so, it's very unlikely that you understand what's going on. Again, this is not disrespectful of any viewer at all. But the fact is that none of those media that I just described are giving full, accurate coverage. And I've done studies of the media, so this is not hyperbole. This is not rhetoric. This is actually comes from studies of those media. And in terms of the books on this subject, like many subjects, some authors have done an excellent, thorough, accurate job. Others have not. If you've only read 1 or 2 books, you really don't know whether you have read a book that is honest, accurate, and objective for the most part, or whether you've read one that has a lot of spin, that's omitted lots of important information, maybe falsified some of the information. So it's very important on this issue, as on all issues, to read widely and to go to many sources. And until you've done that, it's very likely that you will have gotten, as an American, we're getting Israel spin almost all the time. Either enormous Israeli spin or lots of Israeli spin. That's pretty much the choices if you go across the liberal media and the conservative media. Both of them are largely giving us Israeli spin. And I know it sounds like a strong statement, but that's the sad reality of it.
As far as I remember, this is the story it pushed you as a journalist to find the truth and start.
That's right.
As I remember when you
That's
told
right.
us how you switched from journalist to...
That's right. To get into my story, that's a good idea to explain that. My background is in journalism, so that's why I feel I feel that journalism is extremely important, especially in democracies, especially in a republic like ours, the United States, because we have the good fortune to live in a country where we vote for our representatives, and we vote for them based on the information we have. Most of the information we have about candidates and about issues, especially international issues, come from our newspapers, television shows, and magazines. So it's very important that they do a good job. And I believe most journalists are doing a good job and are trying to do a good job. I was one of those. I was a small town journalist in Sausalito, writing local journalism. I was the editor of a weekly newspaper when the Palestinian Intifada, as it's called, the second one, the Palestinian uprising, began in fall of 2000. My youngest son had started college. All 3 of my children were therefore living out of the home, and I had extra time, and suddenly in the news was this Palestinian uprising, where children were throwing stones, sometimes against tanks. And I got curious about it. I thought, well, I'll just follow this in my spare time. Not from my newspaper, because we didn't cover international news at all, even close to it, but just out of curiosity, I'll just follow this Israel-Palestine issue and see what it's all about. And when I did that, I noticed, wait, we're hearing mostly from and about Israelis. What about those Palestinians? You know, I want the full story. I noticed that we weren't getting the full story. And I had extra time, and I'm curious. I sometimes dive into things. And we had the internet. So I thought, well, I'll just go on the internet and start sort of seeing what I find. And I discovered you could get really very excellent news coverage, almost in real time, from the region itself, from Palestinian media that are in English, from Israeli media that are in English, and from a number of human rights organizations that are working there. The United Nations has a number of organizations there. US Aid has people there. Christian peacemaker teams were and are there. So you could get first-hand reports from people. And I started getting these first-hand reports from Americans and news reports from Israeli and Palestinian media, and discovered that it was very different than what we were getting in the San Francisco Chronicle or NPR or the New York Times, that there was a great deal, it was much worse. Palestinians, this was in fall of 2000 and winter of 2001, and there was a very ruthless armed aggression against a largely unarmed population of Palestinians.
So that might be a surprise for you, my viewers, but let's find out more after the break.
You're watching The Lighthouse for today's viewers, brought to you by oneworldforyou.org.
So as we mentioned, we as Americans should be knowing a little bit more about the subject between Palestinian and Israeli, or Israel itself, because we are, no matter what, we are involved with it. So let's find out what kind of involvement we have in it from Alison again.
Well, we have a great deal of involvement, mainly financial. But there are two involvements, but the financial involvement is enormous. We give Israel over $8 million per day, not per year. This is per day. This is much more than we give to all of sub-Saharan Africa put together, and you can throw in Latin America and the Caribbean, and it's more than we give all of those countries to Israel. We give that amount of money to Israel every day. Well, it's per day, and Israel is one of the smallest countries on the planet. It's also one of the richest. It's in the top 30. Sometimes it's rated number 29, sometimes it's rated 18th. Its unemployment rate is lower than the US. Its balance of payments is better than the US. If anything, they should be giving us money, but they're not. And we have been giving them money for many decades. We also, this is really, everything about Israel-Palestine almost that you learn is astounding, because they have arranged a system. They have a very powerful lobby in the U.S. People call it the Israel lobby. They have managed to arrange a system where American tax money goes to Israel at the very beginning of the fiscal year in a lump sum.
Oh, wow. So
unlike, I pay my bill every month, for my electric bill every month, my water bill. Well, in this case, this isn't a bill. I mean, in a way, they charge us whatever they want. Unlike military and foreign aid everywhere else in the world that goes monthly or quarterly, it all goes to Israel at the very beginning of the year. Since we're operating at a deficit, we don't have that money. We're in debt. So we borrow the money and immediately give it away. That means that we pay interest on the money we no longer have long afterward. Israel doesn't need to spend it all at the beginning of the year. They make interest on it. So we are paying one analyst, a former Foreign Service officer of great ability, Richard Curtis, a World War II veteran, award-winning Foreign Service officer, estimated that while we give Israel about $8 million per day, it costs Americans about $15 million per day. both because of the interest that we pay and there are other costs as well. You know, imagine that they have managed to slip this through. Now, I would like some Israel partisan, and they're very powerful, they're a small number but very powerful, to tell the American public why, first of all, why we should give them that quantity of money, and secondly, why in the world would we give it at the beginning of the year? You know, if people think we should give that money, and we've never had a discussion about that, we've never had a debate, well, let's see. Maybe let's give 1 day's worth of that money to Sacramento. $8 million would be very nice for the people of Sacramento to have. I've lived here now for about 1.5 years, maybe 2 years. It's a lovely city. They have beautiful parks and swimming pools around the city, I've noticed. I have grandchildren. And then I've learned, oh, a lot of these swimming pools are closed now. Or they're very limited hours. Thought, that's crazy.
Yeah.
You've got this wonderful resource.
Even schools.
The schools are closed down. They will fall into ruin. It will be such a waste. All these children can use them. All these families can use them. But we don't have the money to maintain them. And yet we have the money to send to Israel. You know, I think we might decide, well, we could at least take 1 day away from Israel and maybe spend it on Americans. Maybe spend it on American children. But we don't. And that's not because this is what the American public believes. We don't know. This is our money. It's our tax money. But it's never discussed. It's never debated. We're never even told that this amount of money goes to Israel. Our politicians don't debate it because the Israel lobby is so powerful that they don't want to trigger its anger. So instead they just don't talk about it, and we end up paying the bill. The other way that we're involved is that our government, again, it's not just Obama, it's not just George Bush, they're both the same. They both do what Israel tells them to do, which means veto international resolutions concerning Israel-Palestine that could possibly bring peace, that could possibly bring justice. The U.S. vetoes these. We shield Israel from what the rest of the world is trying to do because Israel tells us to do that. That means the rest of the world sees the U.S. taking actions that are harmful to the region, are harmful to the world, and are even harmful to the U.S. But we don't see it, we don't even know about it, because again, the U.S. media usually don't report these things. When they do report them, we get a very Israeli-centric view of it. Look at Wolf Blitzer, our CNN anchorman. Wolf Blitzer used to work for the Israel lobby. He was the voice of Israel in the United States for a number of years. And people think this is Wolf Blitzer, he's giving us honest journalism. Well, maybe he is elsewhere. I don't know. He's certainly an engaging man when you watch him on television, but he is an Israel partisan. Look at Jeffrey Goldberg. He's one of these pundits, supposedly an expert on the Middle East. Well, Jeffrey Goldberg is an American who immigrated to Israel, became an Israeli citizen, served in the Israeli military. In fact, he was at a prison guard of a very brutal Israeli prison. So when he comments on Israel-Palestine as supposedly an expert neutral observer, we are hearing from a former Israeli soldier. In fact, maybe not former, because Israelis stay in the Israeli reserves for many decades. Depending on Goldberg's age, he would normally still be an Israeli reserve soldier. Now, I don't know if he is. He won't answer those questions. It's very possible that he got out of his reserve duty because he's doing Israel a much greater service by representing them in the U.S. media and pretending to be an objective observer and commentator. But he's not. Now, if he wants to be a commentator and say, I'm an Israeli, and I'm very partisan towards Israel, here are my views, then of course he can do that, but people should know that fact. And then maybe they would bring, a counterpoint to that. But instead, most people aren't informed about his biases.
Wow.
The other way we're involved in this very sad, tragic conflict is that we have helped Israel for many decades. We've given them massive amounts of money. We have special trade relations with them that often hurt Americans. We have trade relations that hurt American farmers. We have trade relations that hurt American industry. We give Israel special perks that will end up costing thousands of jobs to Americans. The oil embargo that occurred about 40 years ago, those of us that are older remember gas prices in the U.S. used to be very low. Mm-hmm. I drove to California from the East Coast, and I think I used to pay 25 cents per gallon.
Wow.
Suddenly, the gas prices went way up. Well, this was because of the Six-Day War, and the years after that, Israel was occupying the holy sites, not only of the Jewish holy sites, which is fine, but they're occupying Christian holy sites and Muslim holy sites. This is an illegal. Part of it they said we have annexed parts of Jerusalem. That's illegal, but they claim to have done parts of that. So they were occupying holy sites. Saudi Arabia said to the U.S., "This is illegal. Tell your ally to withdraw, to stop occupying those holy sites." The U.S., this was with Nixon. Nixon was embroiled in Watergate, so Henry Kissinger was largely in charge of U.S. policies, and Henry Kissinger did not do that. He just ignored this reasonable request. It was a demand and a request, but it was a reasonable one. It was entirely appropriate for us to tell Israel, "You're not allowed to conquer land, please withdraw." But Kissinger did not do that. So the American public, the oil then went up in price, and the American public paid the price. This caused a massive recession. Thousands of people lost jobs. The price of gasoline when we went to fill up our cars suddenly was much higher than it was before. And all of this was because of Israel and because of the Israel lobby.
Powerful.
Very powerful,
Yeah.
Very powerful. Too powerful. It's not healthy for anybody.
I don't know if they are doing any good for themselves too.
I don't think so either, because I don't think constant warfare is good.
Let's find out. Let's find out after the break.
oneworldforyou.org, promoting cultural understanding through the media.
So before the break, we find out what kind of involvement American with Israel financially. Let's find out if there is any other details or story from Ms. Alison.
Thank you. Well, as I mentioned, there's also the diplomatic shielding that goes on that in some ways might even be more significant. Mm-hmm. So I think those are the two major factors. One of the crew members asked a very good question during the break, basically getting to the heart of it. Well, what should happen? What should happen to Israel? Where do we go from here? And I'll get into that a little bit now. Maybe then we'll go back to the history. But your viewers might be impatient. They might have that same very good question. Mm-hmm. What do we do now? My view is that our first responsibility as Americans, of course, is for our own tax money and our own government. And I feel that the way our tax money is being used now is very harmful. It's perpetuating the conflict. It's causing tragic loss of life. And as we've all seen, it's not making things better. It's sort of, like a lot of governmental policies where you throw money after a failed policy, you keep throwing more money at it to make it better, and it gets worse. It's time to stop throwing the money. It's not making it better.
Give them
it's making it worse.
Steal more land and build up more.
What it does is this massive amount of money to Israel makes the militarists in Israel, and that's not all Israelis, but the militarists among the leadership decide we don't ever have to compromise. We have the most powerful nation on the planet, the United States, in our pocket. They will give us money forever. They will cover for us forever. We don't have to compromise. We can just keep stealing land. We can treat Palestinians however we wish, and we can get away with it. Other Israelis are objecting to that, but they don't have any power because we keep throwing this money at the people whose vision has failed, who have no vision. My feeling is when we stop this misuse of our money, apply it where it is needed, either for public services, for our population, for our veterans who are underserved, or just keep it in our own pockets, not lower our taxes. Whatever the American public decides, we should decide about it, would be a better use of our money. What would that mean for Israel? It would be very good, because it would still be very powerful. Its military is usually judged about the fourth or fifth or so most powerful military on the planet. It wouldn't go away. It would still have a powerful military. It would still have a powerful economy for quite a period of time. But the people of Israel and the leadership would recognize, okay, we can't dominate the entire region forever. We do have to compromise. We do have to negotiate honestly for the first time ever with Palestinians about how we will share this land. They're living there now. Israelis are living there. Most have been born on that land. Palestinians are living there. Palestinian refugees, according to international law, have the right to return. You know, Israel came into existence after I was born. If I'd been thrown out of the U.S., I wouldn't give up my right to return. They have the right to return. So what do we do about that? We stop the U.S. money, and then there's a motivation. Palestinians have always had a motivation to negotiate. You know, they are miserable. They are at the receiving end of massive violence, humiliation, suffering. They want a solution. Israelis have felt, we keep getting money from Israel, from the U.S., we don't have to compromise. We stop the money. The Israelis who have vision and the Palestinians who have vision come together and they hammer out a negotiation. Either two states, two sovereign states, not one little captive state of little pieces, which is what Israel has sort of semi-offered. Oh, okay, you can have a few pieces of the West Bank, you can have a piece of Gaza, we'll call it a state. That's basically what they're offering. That wouldn't work. But if they start hammering it out, okay, there will be a Palestinian state, there will be an Israeli state, they will both be sovereign states, maybe that's what the solution will be. Maybe it will be a solution where there will be one state with equal rights for all people, Jews, Christians, Muslims, maybe that will be, they'll work it out. But that won't happen as long as we keep throwing money we don't even have at a problem that makes it worse. Now, can that happen? Yes, it can. One of the hopeful things is, as we've said in some of the other programs, is that the history of that land is of these populations living together successfully. Muslims, Christians, and Jews have lived on land that is holy to all three of them for centuries, for thousands of years, successfully.
And it has a name, and Jesus born there.
That's right. There's been a history of living together. That's
holy
right.
Land. Yeah.
It's a holy land for all three. Before 1940s,
We didn't choose it.
they
God
were living
chose
there.
it this way.
Also, there are other conflicts that looked intractable. South Africa now no longer has apartheid. They went through the Truth and Reconciliation Commissions. That's moved forward. There's still a lot of difficulty there, but it's moved forward quite a bit. So there's a pattern there to follow. Ireland, there were the Irish conflict, the Catholics and the Protestant, Northern Ireland, and Ireland itself. So there were a lot of conflicts with the Irish question that have moved forward and with a great deal of success. So there have been other conflicts around the world. It's not that it's easy to, when there's been a massive conflict and lives have been lost on both sides, to move forward, but there are patterns where that has happened successfully, where people do that and move on. Look at World War II. Germany and France were killing one another. Germany and England were killing one another. So, there are these horrible
History
conflicts.
full of stories.
That's right. They end, populations move on. Most people just want to live their lives. They want to raise their children, they want to get married, they want to have grandchildren. Really, most of our desires are pretty similar, and most people would rather just, okay, forget it. Politicians work it out. I just want to live here and live my life. And I think that can and would happen if the U.S. would stay out of it, and we would love to stay out of it. It's the Israel lobby that keeps pushing us to be in it. And as I say, I think it's very foolish, because it's very short-sighted. It's not good for Israel. It's not. If I were an Israeli and knew that, okay, my children, men and women, there's universal military service, have to go in and serve as an occupying force where you're oppressing a whole population. Mm-hmm. That's not going to last forever. That's, you're creating hatred. When you oppress a whole population, they're not going to love you for it. That's placing you at risk. It's not a good situation.
God gave it to them.
Well, that's the odd thing, is that there are a lot of excuses for what Israel's doing. Most Israelis are not really observant. They're not religious. So
they are not born there. They are not belong to that. Israel
the idea
is land.
that did God, quote, give this land to Israel? Well, the religious interpretation is very different than that. The religious Jews, when Zionism began in the late 1800s, were opposed to it. This was a major heresy. God had dispersed them. Therefore, they would only come back when God brought them back, not through the point of a gun. So Zionism was considered heretical. Jews in Palestine were opposed to Zionism because it was against God's will.
If God wants them to be there, He will give them comfort life without helping from
now,
America.
For the Christian
also.
point of view, the covenant, there are two covenants: the covenant of the Old Testament, the covenant of the New Testament. The covenant of the Old Testament was with the Jews. With the coming of Jesus, that was extended to all humans. So no, it wasn't a real estate document. This was, in the Christian belief and theology, was that the land now belongs to everyone, that the new covenant was with all of human beings. And there's been distortion of Christianity, very weird distortion that was created. It began over 100 years ago. It increased with the coming of Israel, that funded a type of theology that claimed that all the Jews are supposed to go back to Israel. There will then be a massive violence. Hundreds of thousands of people will be killed.
I think it's
that will bring back
God
Jesus.
will, the violence. And
well,
God
this is there's a theology called dispensationalism. It's also sometimes called Christian Zionism. It's fabricated. It's a misreading of both the Old Testament and of the New Testament. It says things about the New Testament that are not in the New Testament. If people just read the New Testament, not the so-called annotations about it, it's not there. But there was an annotated Bible that was published in 1909 called the Schofield Bible, in which a minister who was a former criminal, who had abandoned his wife and children, was a bit of a huckster, wrote an annotation to the Bible in which he will take a verse of the Bible and say, well, here's what it means. You read the verse and think, no, that's not what it means. So he sort of rewrote the Bible. And that was published by the Oxford University Press. Now, why in the world would Oxford University Press, that was around for centuries, publish such a thing? That's a mystery. I don't know if we have time to get into that now, but there's some
maybe
very strange aspects
of the show
of it.
if you like to come. Okay, let's continue talking about the last subject before we go.
So we were talking about the Schofield Bible, as it's called, about this annotated Bible that was first published in 1909 by this man, Cyrus Schofield. Well, it keeps being updated and changed more and more. So annotations don't fit the New Testament, but this has been in Bible colleges in some places. And some people who wanted to use that, for example, Jerry Falwell, was bought a jet plane by Israel. So even though there are many fundamentalist ministers, as well as mainstream ministers, who are appalled at this, a very, very unchristian Bible, they don't have jet planes to become famous. The ones who will teach this have a jet plane, get lots of money, or on TV Sunday mornings. So this really very strange, somewhat distorted version of Christianity has grown over the years. And it's hard to know how Scofield had the access to it, but it might be related to the fact that for some reason he became a member of a literary club in Manhattan called the Lotus Club in the back about 1909, just before that. It's not the normal place. Manhattan Literary Club is not where you expect a Southern preacher to be a member, but he was oddly enough a member. Well, the membership chairperson was a man named Untermeyer, Samuel Untermeyer, who was a New York attorney and a Zionist, very strong Zionist. So there has been speculation, a number of people have written about this, that it's very plausible that Untermeyer sort of used Scofield, made the connections to the Oxford University Press, and that there's much more to how that Bible got published. I just have been studying that the last year or so. So there are a lot of strange parts to this. It's very troubling, it's very damaging, ultimately very tragic, and will get much worse and will impact all Americans in ways we're already impacted, we don't know about it. Our financial crisis is directly related to it. The Iraq War is directly related to Israel, and the push to attack Iran, the misreporting about Iran, is directly related to Israel-Palestine. So I hope that people will look into it for themselves, will go to the If Americans New website, the Council for the National Interest website. We're doing our best to give the full information there. This is not a political issue. Conservatives and liberals, when they have the facts, view it the same way. This is an issue of justice, humanitarian values, principles, and it affects all of us.
In fact, without peace, without justice, in that area will never be peace.
That's right.
Without human rights for all, in that area, as Holy Land for all, will never be peace on earth around us. And the best what we can do, educate ourselves and find what is in it for us and how it hurt us as Americans. The real, the fact and non-fact stories, and do our judgment to find out the truth and follow up and call for justice.
That's right. About 2/3 to 3/4 of Americans are very reachable. Most people say we should not take sides because people have the common sense to realize, wait, if you don't know what's going on, stay out of it. So I think most Americans have common sense. I think their instincts are good ones, and we need to follow through on those.
And lately was a conference, Bethlehem Sister Cities, and a sister city in Sacramento, and the people who were in charge of talking about, giving speeches, most of them from churches, and a lot of Jewish organizations and American organizations fighting for those people's rights. Because of us, we need peace, we need to live happier with our neighbors also, who are from here or there. Iraq war comes, and the result comes to us also. So really, really, I appreciate your coming and appreciate your giving that knowledge for me and my viewers.
Thank you.
I really appreciate it.
Thank you, and thank you for your hard-working crew.
On behalf of my viewers, really, I thank you very much. And
Thank
for
you.
you, my viewers, I know the information is not pleasant that much for all of us, but things we have to know about it, to think deeper, and call our responsible people, our government, our Congress, to do what we think, what you think, what your neighbor think is right for us as Americans, to make peace also on earth. I leave you with this message, and thank you for watching. We see you next time.